Temple Mishkon Tefillo and the Adult Education Committee. It is my pleasure to have Ethan and her wonderful sister, Deborah, here with us today. It's part of our guest speaker program. Also want to tell you about another event that's happening next week at 4:30. We are going to be showing live in person, not on Zoom, the movie The Road Between Us, which is an incredible movie. I don't know if you guys have seen it yet, but it's free of charge at Mishkon Tefillo in Venice at 4:30. And we'll probably have a discussion afterwards. Avery Crute is coordinating that event. So just to let you know that there is another interesting and great event all about Israel happening. I know our Rabbi Joshua Katsan is here today, and he really wanted Adult Ed to focus on Israel as much as we could, and early too. So we're so pleased to have Deborah Bronner, a current and a current member of Mishkon, introduce her wonderful brother and great journalist, Ethan Bronner. Deborah, take it away.
Hi, yeah, thank you. Okay, yeah, so it is my great honor to introduce my brother, Ethan Bronner. This is his fourth tour of serving as a foreign journalist in Israel. His first one started over 40 years ago, and he's now with Bloomberg. Before he started working for Bloomberg, he was at the New York Times for 17 years as deputy foreign editor, deputy national editor, and Jerusalem bureau chief. And I'm ready to ask Ethan the first question. I need to change. Okay, great. All right. So my first set of questions have to do with your experience as a journalist. Your job with Bloomberg is your fourth tour of covering Israel as a foreign journalist. What changes have you seen during the 40 plus years you've covered this story?
Well, thanks, Debbie. I'm going to call her Debbie because that's what I was called, but you guys can call her whatever you want. And thanks to all of you for gathering for this. So I don't know, Debbie and I will talk for maybe half an hour, and then you guys can have we can have a broader conversation. Look, there's a lot of changes that have occurred since I first was a reporter here in 1983 for Reuters. I actually opened the Reuters bureau in Jerusalem because it was based in Tel Aviv at the time. And this was not a political move. This was because you couldn't, there was sort of the communication systems in Jerusalem were still very primitive, and we had to use telex at that time. So there were a lot of changes of that nature. And of course, there was no internet for my first two assignments here, which changed the way journalists work enormously. But those things are true universally around the world. The big change here parallels to some extent the changes in the United States, which is that I felt like when my first two assignments here in the 80s and the 90s, that most Israelis would sort of wake up every day and think, maybe today was my lucky day and a journalist will interview me because I have so much to say. This is a place that's just can't stop talking about itself. I used to also think that you could, again, before websites and the internet, when you had each morning what was, Kol Yisrael and Galei Tzahal, the two main radio stations, beginning at 6, the interviewer, the presenter would basically, ream out everybody in the government and everybody in the Knesset for like an hour. And I used to think that you could basically, wake up, take notes, write your story and go back to bed because the whole place was talking about itself endlessly. What's really happened in the last 10 or 15 years, like in the States, is that there's an incredible mistrust of journalism and of journalists and of public discourse. And it's become very toxic. It's hard for me to get ministers to talk to me. It's hard. The current prime minister, for years had an excellent foreign press spokesman in those years when he was first prime minister in the mid 90s, and then from 2009 onward, he doesn't have a foreign press spokesman anymore. There's no desire to give us information. It's all kind of performative, and when I tell people, taxi drivers or whatever, that what I'm doing here, the first thing they want to know is, well, whose side are you on? And they don't just mean between Palestinians and Israelis. They mean, are you a Bibist or are you a leftist? What's your story? The idea that I don't have a story, that my goal is to try to tell this story as fairly and with as much context as possible, strikes most people as just some bizarre fantasy that nobody would really engage in. So it's been it's in that sense, it's been kind of depressing change over these years. I guess that would be one answer, Deb.
Okay, great. Okay, and next question I have is, what is it like to be living in Israel and working as a journalist?
I mean, it continues that same thought, some of that, the way people think of me and so forth. But, I have an unusual relationship here. First of all, because I'm Jewish. Second of all, because I speak decent Hebrew. Third of all, because I've been coming for so long. Fourth of all, because my wife is Israeli and we have tons of cousins in this country. So I'm a kind of 1 foot in and 1 foot out all the time. And it's great in a lot of ways. I mean, I can hear the music of the society in a way that many foreign correspondents cannot. But the normal answer is it's a wonderful place to live. It's a very dynamic, culturally robust, incredible food, great weather. But of course, beginning on October 7th, 2023, there was a horrible sense of defeat of the entire project seemed to be falling apart. And I think it's fair to say that those who are not right wing, the arrival of this last government into office almost exactly 3 years ago was also a deeply disappointing thing, because it brought into government people who are openly Jewish supremacists and racists in certain ways, and brought a zeitgeist to public discourse that hadn't been acceptable before, a kind of Kahanist version of some of that. So that's also true. And I would say that, many people that we know in this country they're feeling better now, but it's been a very dark time. And part of it, of course, was on October 8th to wake up and realize not just what had just happened, and that this military and security system that you considered to be so terrific had failed so miserably, and the awful things that were done on October 7th. But that when you looked up and looked around, you were being shot at from Lebanon, from Syria, from Iraq, from Yemen. In other words, suddenly it looked like, wow, everybody hates us. This is a whole nother game that we didn't really understand we were in the middle of. We thought we were kind of okay. So that has subsided to the extent that the Israelis, of course, militarily and through their security and intelligence services, carried out a lot of victories, if you like, in the last year. But the attitude may not have changed. And I think for many people, waking up and seeing that out there, and then the internal elements as well, has depressed a lot of people. I don't just mean leftists. I mean, like, people that you think of, like Dan Meridor, if it's a name that you're familiar with. Dan Meridor was the justice minister. He was the strategic affairs minister under Netanyahu in the 90s and in the first part of the 2000s. He's the Likud prince, right? His father was a famous Cherut and revisionist hero, and Dan was Begin's secretary of the cabinet and all this sort of thing. He's the same age as the state, maybe a year or two older. He feels that everything he's worked for is falling off a cliff. So there's a lot of that. Now, on the other hand, our relatives to the right, and we have a number of relatives to the right, both in our family and through my wife's family, they feel like, that their things are really, this is kind of God's moment and we're really getting somewhere. So it does depend on whom you talk to. But it has been hard to be lighthearted in Israel for the last 2 years.
Okay. All right. So one more question I have specifically about your experience as a journalist, which is, please tell us your methods and how you develop sources.
Well, I'm not sure I know how to answer methods. There's a series of things that happen, right? We have to do both. So I'm the bureau chief for Bloomberg, and Bloomberg News is a slightly unusual place because it has a bit of a focus on the finances and money, but actually, because of the geopolitics of the last few years, what we do has been not very different from what the AP, Reuters, and other news organizations do. So there are 5 of us and 2 Palestinians who work with us on contract. And, we spend a lot of time talking to people. These days, a lot of WhatsApp exchanges, both on the phone and in writing. And you go places, right? It's a small country. You can't go to Gaza, but you can go to the place, so to the area around the Gaza, where the Gaza so-called envelope, the OTEF as it's called, the border area, talk to the people who live there. You can go to northern Israel, and you spend time developing sources all in that way. You read a lot, and you cross-reference. You talk to American officials, Palestinian officials, and so forth. So that's how we do our job, and we try to figure out, using whatever also data and statistics there are, actual information. Israel is a fairly advanced society that has a fair amount of data on birth rates, population rates, crime rates, so that you can learn stuff. And then we write broader, more analytical pieces aimed at sort of looking forward at all the things that are happening. I mean, that's the sort of basic method of how we do our work. Obviously, if the prime minister says something significant that day, we write a story about it. I don't necessarily personally do it. There, as I said, there are 5 of us. But we do feel the need to cover the news and then to tell you what the news means as best we can, and not in an opinionated way. I know it's hard for people to understand that, but the goal is to not take a side. The goal is to make it clear what each side says and what its evidence for it is.
Do you have people that you've known over the last 40 years that you can call and kind of and
Many.
get insight from?
Yes, many. I mean, I've been at this for a long time here, and so I mean, there are a lot of the people in government and on the edges of government and in academia and in the military are people that I've known during the course of these 40 years. Yes, I mean, the ones who were there in the 80s are mostly retired. Um, but there are still journalists also that we've been working side by side for many years. So I do feel there are a lot of people I can talk to, and sort of gut check myself and get some reality check. Absolutely, yes.
And one last thing. I remember at one point I heard you say about what it was like to cover Israel during this time in terms of it being a certain important moment in Jewish history. Do you want to just say something more about that, and then we'll move on to the next subject?
I can't remember what you're referring to, but it
Right.
certainly has been an extremely eventful time in Jewish history, and in Israel's history, which are of course linked concepts. And I do feel it's an honor to try to chronicle it. It's not been a particularly happy time, I would say. And a lot of the contradictions and internal tensions have become really revealed, and of course a growing gap between many Jews abroad and this country, and this whole phenomenon about what does it mean to be Jewish, and the fact that Jews, when they live abroad, I say abroad, they live in the United States, then they're a minority. And when you're a minority, your biggest concern is individual rights and civil rights and so on, because you're afraid of the majority running roughshod over you. So those are the things you focus on. And Jews in the United States, of course, have been central to free speech, freedom of religion, all those issues that are so important to what it means to be an American. In this country, of course, Jews are in charge. They're the majority. So they're less concerned with those things. And therefore, there is a gap between what are Jewish values. And when you're in this country, the sense of being a member of a tribe, being a member of a group, and the group identity is so much more significant than it is in the United States. And I think that, part of the problem is both sides can get out of control. And I think that the great challenge for modern society, and we see it today in Hungary and India and Russia and China, all over the world, that what we thought of as the kind of post 60s approach to individual rights and human rights were ultimately was sort of pushed aside by a desire to be a member of a tribe. And Israel was a little bit ahead, and that's why some of those countries kind of liked Israel, but it poses an incredible challenge. And you see a fascinating business with the Mamdani victory in New York, where you have many Jews feeling that the things that Mamdani cares about, let's leave aside his opposition to the existence of Israel as a Jewish state, but to other things, to the sort of idea of New York as a place for minorities to thrive, that was a very Jewish thing. And so they glom onto that, and let's hope they're doing the right thing, because his opposition to Israel is profound. And it's interesting that it doesn't bother them. We'll see what impact it has.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on to questions about the news. One question I think many people on our call today are interested in is, tell us what the state of the ceasefire is.
Yeah. Well, fragile, as people like to describe it. Very unclear what's, I think the story has now over the last 4 weeks been told often enough that you don't need me to tell it, but fundamentally the 20 points were 1 or 2 points that everybody agreed to, which was an exchange of many Palestinian prisoners, almost 2,000, for the remaining 48 hostages, living and dead. And Hadar Golden's corpse was just handed over to the Israelis. And interestingly, he's got nothing to do with this war. This is a guy who was killed in Gaza in 2014 and held as a kind of dead hostage ever since then. And he just came back. His family, can you imagine, 11 years campaigning to get your son's body back? And I've been on the phone with his mother. These are people who never stop. God bless them. So anyway, that is all happening. What's going to happen next is really unclear. You know that Gaza, the big change of the offer that of this last peace, or not peace, but ceasefire, the big difference between it and the ones under the Biden administration is that Israel didn't have to leave Gaza. It didn't have to take its troops out of Gaza in order to get all of its hostages back. That had never been on the table before. So that is now happening. The hostages are coming out, and Israel holds on to 50% of Gaza. Now, what's going to happen in Gaza is very unclear, because President Trump wants a peacekeeping force. Nobody wants to join the peacekeeping force. People wouldn't mind being members of a peace observation force, but very few foreign troops want to come in and confront Hamas, an armed Hamas soldier, and try to take his gun away from him. And of course, that is an enormous challenge that everybody in theory wants to see Hamas disarmed, and no one has any idea how to do it other than Israel actually doing it, and that nobody seems to want that to happen. President Trump doesn't want that war to start again. I can't see them disarming Hamas without another war. So we'll see. There is this weird business about 150 Hamas gunmen are holed up in the yellow zone, in the Israeli held zone right now. And Israel is the question is whether they can leave, and if they leave, what happens to their guns. You have Steve Witkoff and the Americans saying this would be a great test. They can hand over their guns. This would be the first example of disarming and so forth, and decommissioning, as it's called. They are sending generals and three-star types hanging around here in Kiryat Gat from a number of countries to try to set up a system to move this forward. It's very hard to imagine it going well. But a lot of things that were hard to imagine have happened. So, it's not my job to say it won't, but it's going to be difficult for sure. And so far, uh, the part that it is controlled still by Hamas is increasingly controlled by Hamas. They're putting kids with handing guns to kids and reestablishing their armed forces. They're demanding back taxes from business people, and people are afraid of them. But on the other hand, they're grateful that there is somebody providing order. There's nobody else providing order inside the 47% where 90% of the people live. So to be clear, everybody has been kind of pushed into the Hamas area. We don't really know how many people live in the so-called yellow zone. It's somewhere between 1 and 30,000. Probably 5 or 10,000 people. And again, the Americans have this idea that they're going to make that the shining city on a hill. They'll start investing money in there, and then people will move with their feet into that part of Gaza. It's a little hard to imagine it as a kind of East Berlin, West Berlin, or North Korea, South Korea idea. It's hard to imagine this going well again, but those are the ideas that are on the table right now. And at the moment, as with the people we talk to in Gaza, are still living in horrible tents on rubble, unable to get much health care. Some schools have started up. There is food coming in a way that wasn't before, but it's pretty horrible. And winter is on its way. And it rains like hell in Gaza, and I really don't envy people trying to hold on to a tent in a rainstorm in Gaza. So we'll see where this goes, but there's a lot of misery ahead of us for sure.
And what about just the concept of the construction? Is there some how is that covered in the 20-point plan?
It's not, there's supposed to be reconstruction, but no reconstruction in any area controlled by Hamas. So as I say, where all the people live is controlled by Hamas. So in theory, we'll have to see a change occurring. They're talking about January as their goal for the beginning of the change. The one thing, the difficult, it's very hard to imagine Hamas handing over its arms. It's sort of, that's its raison d'etre, to be a resistance movement. And by the way, there was a poll done. There's a wonderful Palestinian pollster called Khalil Shikaki, who's been doing polls in the West Bank and Gaza since the 1990s. And obviously, whether people are always honest, whether it's possible to get all of it's hard to know, but he just published his most recent poll in October, the end of October, in which he found that I think the number it's under 70, but somewhere between 65 to 70% of Palestinians do not believe that Hamas should be disarmed. Okay, in the West Bank and in Gaza. So there is a desire for continued armed struggle among Palestinians. By the way, in that same poll, 86% of the people do not believe that any atrocities occurred on October 7th, 2023 by Hamas or any other Gazans. They believe it's all invented, all Israeli propaganda, or done by Israelis as they come to rescue people. 86% 2 years later. So the sense on both sides of utter contempt for the other is just intense, and it's hard to see where this goes. I mean, in the 90s and even in the 2000s, when I was here for the New York Times, there was kind of a general idea that the conflict has been hijacked by the extremists on both sides, but most people want what's right for the place. They want a coexistence. They get that there are two peoples and so on. And that's just not true anymore. So the extremes are the majority in both cases. And there's just a tiny group in the middle going, So that's a very, and to some extent you could argue that that's politics around the world, but it is in a place like this that's so volatile. It's extremely alarming, and no, and October 7th, it just it raped people's emotions in this country. They're incapable of feeling anything other than rage and anger and fear, and I get it, but it's not leading to anywhere helpful. I mean, there is not a single party that's looking to run in the coming election, Zionist party, that is willing to talk about bringing Arabs, Israeli Arabs, into the coalition. All right, this is considered absolutely verboten. And the last government, you will remember, it didn't last very long, a year and a half or so, but there was an Arab party for the first time, and it was seen as a great triumph of Zionism for many people, by many people, I mean, but that's not going to happen this time. So it's a tough time.
Okay. This one might be a little bit shorter, but how is the U.S. government planning to be involved?
It's theoretically in charge, right? It has set up this this base in Kiryat Gat, and President Trump is in charge of the I can't remember what it's called, Council for Peace, and there are American military people there running running the little operation, and 200 U.S. troops also there. So in theory, they're planning to be very involved. We all worry about President Trump's attention span. Also, it's a very, very difficult task. He has people in charge who are well-meaning and thoughtful. I mean, I think that Steve Witkoff is a good guy, but does Steve Witkoff really know what he's doing? It seems so unlikely, right? Now, the weird thing, of course, is that people who know what they're doing have failed repeatedly at this place, and so suddenly people who don't know what they're doing seem somehow to have succeeded. And so, who am I to say that they shouldn't be in charge? But it's important to them to break taboos, and that's great. Talking to Hamas, fine by me. All those sorts of things, and you don't want to repeat the old peace stuff, blah blah blah. But I don't. At some point they have to figure out what they're doing, and I'm not sure that they know.
Okay, the next question we may have already covered part of, but how do the different players view the ceasefire? The Israelis, Hamas, the Palestinian population, other Arab countries, and the rest of the world?
I think it's an evolving picture. The Israelis fundamentally wanted to get their hostages home, and there was a very interesting debate in this country, especially as we got toward only 20 living hostages left, which is, on the one hand, this idea, and you saw it repeatedly in Saturday night protests, that we need our people home. This is a wound in our society that we must heal, and it's our first obligation, fair, legitimate. But on the right, many people say, listen, those are 20 people. We're 10 million. We need to protect this society. Okay. You can't start giving stuff up to get these people back and and another October 7th is brewing. So that was a very strong sentiment in this country. And I think that even now there is a lack of clarity about what's supposed to happen next. Once the hostages are home, then what do you do if you see Hamas is reconstituting itself, not disarming? How big a threat is it? And there are, two views on this. One is, well, remember October 7th. That's all you need to know. The other is, yes, but we have destroyed their missile making capability. We have learned our lesson. Yes, they are a danger, but are they such a danger that we need to go in and have another war and lose another 500 of our valuable young men and break up other families and also anger the rest of the world? Is this really what we need to do, or is there something we can handle under the current situation? So that is sort of underway in this country. I don't think we know the answer. I think on the Palestinian side, there's no belief that the war will end. They're completely pessimistic. They're sure the Israelis will go back in. And they also don't want Hamas to disarm, as I mentioned earlier. So they kind of want there to be more confrontation because they don't believe the political process will get them what they believe they deserve, which is their own sovereignty and their rights. And I think, the rest of the world, like the US, a lot of other issues are going to come up. So it's hard to know if they're going to have the focus to really, make this thing happen once people aren't killing each other and once people aren't screaming about hostages. Will everything just kind of fade into a West Bank type situation, which is where the military goes in, or like in southern Lebanon, and takes care of what it thinks it needs to take care of, and keeps it below the level of a proper war? That seems to me a pretty likely outcome, to be honest, but I don't know.
Okay. Now, the bodies that have not been delivered by Hamas, the last I heard the count was something like 8, or how
No,
many,
it's down now to about 5.
5.
Yeah.
Okay. What's the significance of the bodies that have not been delivered?
I mean, for the people whose kids or brothers there are, obviously it's massively significant. And I think that, one of the beauties of Israeli society is that everybody feels it to some extent. It really is an extended family. That's the most amazing thing about a country that has this tribal identity that the United States doesn't have, right? So that's real. It means a lot to people. But I think we've been told by Israeli officials already months ago that there are probably 4 or 5 bodies that Hamas truly does not know where they are. And they probably won't be able to find them without an enormous amount of effort. I mean, don't forget there are thousands of tons of rubble and so on after this war. So I don't really know what's going to happen. The Israelis have been pretty good about saying we can get most of them back. I don't know what happens when there's 2 or 3 left that they can't get back, and whether that's going to be the cause of a rupture in this whole process or not. It's hard to tell.
Okay, I'm gonna have a couple more questions and then we're gonna open it up to everyone else to ask questions.
Sure.
How likely do you think there will be early elections?
I mean, so officially the election is due on October 27th. It has to be by October 27th, 2026. I think it's reasonably likely it'll be before that date, but I don't think it'll be like in February or March. My instinct is June or July, maybe even September. I mean, there's the problem of the Jewish holidays that gets complicated then. But I think that Netanyahu would look, there's the debate. Some people say he will not run again. I believe he will. He certainly said he will run again. He believes his work is not done, and he is waiting for something to kind of push it in a way, because the polls are not all that good for him right now. His coalition would not get back into power. He's still the most popular person to be prime minister, but his coalition has like 51 and it needs 61. But on the other hand, Netanyahu is like a lot of people in power today, like Xi, like Putin, like Viktor Orban. He believes you stay in power every day you can. You do, because you want to get stuff done. You need 20, 30 years to get it done. This 4 to 8 year stuff can't get anything done. You need to be in power as much as you can. And so you stretch it as much as possible. So my instinct is I don't see any reason for him to call an election before the summer. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
And I believe
All
he'll
right.
run, and I think there's a decent chance he'll win, but we'll see.
So as far as questions, I'm going to ask people to put up the little icon with the hand, and I'll call on them. And okay, a couple more questions. What can you tell us about the State Board of Inquiry into October 7th?
Well, Netanyahu is eager to limit its power, so far there isn't one. There have been a bunch of investigations by the army, by this, by that, but I don't see the equivalent of kind of what happened after the 73 war. I think Netanyahu will keep it to a kind of more symbolic thing, or it'll happen only after he's out of office. That's my instinct.
Okay, and what's the status of Netanyahu's efforts to increase executive power, including the reduction of independence of other parts of the government? And since these efforts were interrupted by the war, where do you see these efforts headed now?
So they're back trying. They're trying to limit the power of the Attorney General. They've refused to acknowledge the President of the Supreme Court as the President of the Supreme Court. There's definitely an attempt by this government to increase executive power, to reduce the power of the judiciary. If you look at it kind of in broad terms, this country was run by the labor Zionist movement until Begin won in 1977, and then over the 50 years that followed, basically the Mizrahi right-leaning settler-oriented politics took over almost everything except the legal profession and the journalism profession. So right now, the government is trying to limit the power of both of those things and to say, well, the will of the people is being stymied by these two unelected forces, and we need to do something about it. And that's where they're putting all of their effort. They're having problems because of the Haredi issue of the draft, and whether Shas and United Torah Judaism are going to actually back this government when it puts laws forward. So it may not be able to get much done, but that is certainly what it would like to do. And it believes, as President Trump believes, that there's a kind of liberal elite that has been stymieing the will of the people, and that needs to be stopped. It's quite problematic in this country because there is no constitution, and the legislature and the executive are kind of the same thing in this country. So it leaves only the judiciary. That said, we don't have to spend a lot of time in this right here, but I do think that when the president of the Supreme Court, Aharon Barak, in the early 90s announced his judicial revolution, it was a pretty far-reaching activist thing to have done, and it has come back to bite them.
Okay, this is the last question, then I'll call on people. What is the status of Netanyahu's trial?
Well, it's been going on for 5 years. And every day he has to testify. He finds another reason that the government business is too important for him, and he asks to stop it, and they tend to. I will say that the most important charge against him, bribery, the judges themselves a year ago said to the prosecutors, "We don't think your case is strong on bribery. If I were you, I would withdraw that charge." The prosecutors declined to do so. My instinct is that it'll go on for a long time. And by the time it's over and appealed, he'll be 80 years old. He just turned 76, and he will not go to jail no matter what happens. And I do think some of the stuff against him, there is some extent of political side to the cases brought against him. That, just as we don't have to get into this now, I think that New York State's case against Trump was also partly politically motivated, and it's that kind of thing. It doesn't mean that no crime was committed. It's just a question of whether it was an attempt to stop him from winning an election, which I believe it was to some extent.
Okay, I'm going to call on Michelle Prince for a question.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Thank you, Ethan. We're so grateful to have this conversation together. I saw in today's Jerusalem Post that 6 individuals were arrested in Detroit for an Islamic State terror group. And I always wonder whether Israel, Mossad, some other intelligence organization is working closely with the FBI for this type of work in the United States. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
That's a great question, Michelle. I don't really know any more than you. I doubt it. I mean, certainly, I doubt that the Israelis are deeply involved in that kind of thing. Although, I mean, we do know that Mossad agents are around the world watching stuff that would concern them. So, it's a perfectly legitimate question. I just don't know the answer. I'm sorry.
Thank
Okay,
you.
All right, Carol Felixson.
What I wonder, and I've wondered all along, is how has Israel so horribly lost the public relations war? And there are some things that I've read about, I've heard about that I don't even know if they're true, but it casts the Israelis in a terrible, terrible light, given what our values have been. And I wonder if you might respond.
So I tried to talk a little bit about that, Carol, when I was talking about the difference between Jewish values in Israel and in the United States, and the fact that American Jews, place enormous focus on human rights and individual rights and minority rights and equality. And here it's more on the group welfare. Look, I think there are two parts to this. One is, why does Israel do things that don't make you happy? We could talk about that. Then there's the question of, is Israel not doing a good job defending itself when it could be doing a better job? And to some extent, your question gets at both of those things. I think that its inability to defend itself is partly because it doesn't understand what it is to be on the other side of it, right? It feels like what its sense of its own danger and challenge is so obvious that the world should understand it and not give it any crap if it responds aggressively and looks back at Jewish history and says, "Oh my God, every time anything happened, we didn't have a state. Now we do. Now we don't have to put up with this anymore." And as a broad narrative, that's correct. It's just that there are these 7 million non-Jews who live here, 2 million as Israeli citizens, 3 in the West Bank and 2 in Gaza, and their lives are less charmed and less good than those of Jews here. So that upsets people abroad. And Israel has sort of a limited ability to worry about it. It's more worried about the safety of its own people. We could discuss whether we think it overreacts, whether the destruction of every house in Rafah and in Gaza City, not every, but say 70 or 80% of them, was this necessary? I don't have an answer. I'm not here to say it wasn't, but it's certainly a legitimate question about whether it was. So, it's a combination of what they do. Is it actually lamentable? And then then the question is, if it isn't lamentable, why aren't they doing a better job of defending themselves? I will say that until the last few years, American Jews often ask that question, and I would say, well, in America, people are much more pro-Israel than they are pro-Arab or pro-Palestinian. For 50 years, Gallup polls showed a deep sympathy toward Israel. So the idea that Israel wasn't doing a good job of defending itself struck me as not correct. Either or the idea that the press was besmirching Israel, I would say either we're not very good at what we do, or we're not trying to besmirch them and you're not interpreting it right, because public opinion is actually very pro-Israel. Now that has changed during this war. It has changed fundamentally, and we saw it creeping up during the course of the last 20 years with young people. And that partly, of course, has to do with the fact that Israel was no longer even claiming it wanted to create a Palestinian state or equality for those here. And also, it's the strength of Israel, the fact that it was such a powerful country, made it hard to feel sorry for it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Carol Stein.
Thank you, Ethan. I'm wondering, when you said the government seems more performative in its interactions with you as a journalist, and where does that leave the relationships between the government and the settler movement? Are there, this may be a simplistic question, but who are or are there leaders in Palestine and in Israel who are up and coming, who actually get what the situation is, who might present an alternative to the bitter conflict and the contempt for both sides that you were describing?
So, Carol, I can the second question I can answer, but how does it relate to the performative nature of their relationship to the press?
Because it sounds like what's going on is the government isn't holding itself to account via the press.
That's true.
And
But of course, what it considers holding itself to account and what you would consider are very distinct things, right? So when you say holding itself to account, you mean why is it continuing to build settlements? Why is it not doing the right thing for Palestinians? But that is not their view of what they should be. Their view of what they should be doing is building more settlements and doing all they can to make sure that the ancient Jewish homeland is in the hands of the Jews where it belongs. So I don't think that I mean, their poor relations with the press have. I just now that I'm thinking as aloud as you ask it, has something to do with the fact that most of the press doesn't agree with them. But so in the sense of like, why should we talk to our enemy that doesn't agree with us? But I will tell you this, which is that the whole society has become more religious and more right wing. I would say, when I've traveled with Prime Minister Netanyahu on his plane, I would say 20 to 30% of my fellow journalists are religious, wearing kippot. And this was not true at all in the 80s and 90s. Not true at all. You barely saw a person with a kippah on a television news studio in those years. And today they're quite common. I mean, probably the most prominent commentator in Israel today, Amit Segal, is a settler from a strong, very ideological settlement of Ofra, and wears a kippah. And so in a way, there is that going on now. Their relationship with those guys is pretty good, and with the rest of the press is pretty terrible. And you also ask, are there young leaders coming up? There do not seem to be. No.
thank you.
It's not. It's not. One is not encouraged by what one sees in the ranks of young politicians. No.
Hey, thank you. Rena?
Yeah, well, this is related to what you just were answering. What about on the Gazan side, and in fact the West Bank side also? Are there any groups that have any chance of changing the story, given the 86% that doesn't even believe October 7th existed? I mean, are there any groups there that can change what's going on those two sides, on the Palestinian side?
I don't see much, Rena. I don't. I mean, one of the difficulties in this conflict, one of the reasons it's so hard to see hope, is it's not like, well, if only X group could win. On the Palestinian side, there's almost no alternative narrative to the absolute utter victimization, no recognition or acceptance of any legitimacy to the Zionist narrative. So it's been. I mean, there have been, at the height of the peace of the coexistence movement in the late 90s, when you had, Yossi Beilin sitting down with Mahmoud Abbas and so on, doing stuff, there were people, and there are still some out there. Of course, there are on both sides, but they just don't have power, and they're not enough of them. And it goes back to something I said earlier, which is it's not true that most people want to coexist and it's the extremes causing trouble, right? Which was in 1996, right after Rabin was assassinated, and it seemed likely that Peres was going to be elected, and Hamas carried out 4 bus bombings that really took away the votes that Peres needed and gave whatever the 30,000, whatever the number was, to Netanyahu. That was a classic example of a few bad people doing something that can change enough people so that it tilted. But that's not the case now. Vast majority of Israelis do not believe in 2 states, and the vast majority of Palestinians, and vast is too strong, but the majority of Palestinians do not believe in 2 states. I think it's about 40% in Gaza.
Okay, thank you. Hal?
Yeah. Thank you both, Deborah, Ethan. I mean, this is really very informative. I wanted to circle back to the whole question of how Israel is reacting to the increasing, well, a number of things, the increasing ostracization, especially in Europe, in academic circles, in public attitude, and the kind of fracturing of American Jewish attitudes towards Israel. Because, when we all were growing up, being Jewish, Israel was job one. I mean, now there are real generational splits. And so I don't have as much of a sense, other than talking with some of my cousins, how this is playing out in Israel, especially as they're kind of circling the wagons as you
Right.
portray it. Yeah.
Um,
And then there's a
I-
second part to
please,
it.
please. Yeah.
Yeah, which is what are Israeli reactions to Peter Beinart's new book? So I mean, that
Okay.
I'd like to hear your
Similar,
thoughts on
yeah. I'm not
Yeah,
sure enough Israelis have read Peter Beinart's new book, but to Peter Beinart, which is the same as his book, I would say the vast majority of Israelis have written him off as nobody that they particularly want to talk to or about. Um, yeah, that is to say, because Peter Beinart in the last 5 years or so moved from liberal Zionist to anti-Zionist, and that is a line that has been very hard for people to see here happening. Look, I think that most Israelis look at what's going on, what they consider, the anti-Semitism, not just what they consider it is. There's anti-Semitism out there in Europe and in the United States, and their basic attitude is, what the hell? What is wrong with you people, right? And what is wrong with you American Jews that if you're not fighting it enough? And it's a weird dynamic, which is, on the one hand, it's like, well, this could work out pretty well for us. Maybe they'll all move here, right? And that's why we're here, because we believe that actually fundamentally in human history, Jews can't live anywhere but here, and that's why we're here. So it's sort of further evidence of the Zionist narrative. And if you say, well, it might help if you didn't do this or you didn't do that, then they say, well, they're going to hate us anyway, right? And so, we might as well defend ourselves properly. I would say that's the overwhelming feeling. It's not the only feeling. I mean, I know many people on the left in this country who are horrified by the fact that there is this as you say, ostracization, that there is this sending Israel out into the cold all by itself, and the feeling that we desperately we were in the process of becoming major members of the international community in the digital world, in the academic world, in medicine. Look at all of our Nobel Prizes. This is us. This is what we want to be. And if we're not careful and people won't talk to us, then our best people will leave. They'll move to Berlin, they'll move to Sacramento, and then we're going to be left with some version of Turkey or Iran as our society here. And I think that is not impossible. Okay. So far, the good news is enough people hate the Jews that they aren't necessarily moving quickly to those other places. But there is an out movement in the last 2 years of 30 to 50,000, but they're often among the more talented people, and they may not come back. Now, I would say that beginning about 30 years ago, when Israel really was producing scholars and scientists and cultural figures that really were of international quality. Many of them would go abroad, spend 5 or 10 years in Silicon Valley, but they tended to want to come home, and many did. Of course, we know many didn't, but many did. So there was a movement. But now the question is, will the movement be more in one direction, and what will be the result for this society? And I think it's a very legitimate and serious concern, and it's too early to tell. The dynamic between, how uncomfortable it is to be a Jew in Paris today compared with how uncomfortable it is to be, if you're a liberal-minded secular Jew, to be here and watch your government be run by people you don't approve of. So I see that all around me. There was, by the way, Eretz Nehederet, which is this sort of Saturday Night Live of Israel, just had a skit a couple of nights ago where you see a girl and a boy, I mean, a young man and a young woman in their 20s, meet in an airport. You can't quite tell where they are. And they go, "Oh, wow, I haven't seen you in so long. You're coming, you're going." And it turns out one is going back to Israel because, oh my God, who can stand this craziness in New York? And the other is, I'm going there because I can't stand it. I can't stand what's going on in Israel. But they can't tell what they're talking about right at the beginning. For the first 20 or 30 seconds of the conversation, you think they're talking about the same thing. It's quite clever. Anyway, there we are.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. We've got 4 people who have questions, and I'm going to call on in order. So it's Jeff, Carol, Rabbi, Josh, and Lee. So Jeff Gornbein.
Okay, I'm starting. I have 2 separate questions. One that's troubled me since the attack at the Novel Music Festival. I read 2 victims talking about their experience. One was a woman who dove under a thorn bush and hid there, and another was a man who got shot in the legs. Both of them said it took like 6 hours for Defense Forces, IDF, to show up. And I'm just curious, why did it take so long? Do you know?
So, that is every Israeli wakes up every morning and asks that question of him or herself. It has been just a terrible, terrible issue. Look, the simple answer is that Hamas did an amazing job of taking down the communication system along the border. They attacked a particularly important IDF base and made it impossible for anyone to talk. They did block the roads, and thousands of them came. It was Simchat Torah and Shabbat, and Israel had grown extremely complacent about any risk that could come from Gaza and from Hamas. So that is the so-called conceptia, the sort of idée fixe that Israelis and the security system had, that this could never happen, even though they were practicing it just across the border. So, once 5,000 people did come and 5,000 missiles did come, it was very, very hard. People were being shot dead as they tried to get there. The movie you're going to see next week is about someone who did get there. Amir T-Bone's father, Noam T-Bone, amazing guy, a general. It's in a great movie. So, I mean, I haven't seen the movie. I've just read the book, but I'm sure it's a great movie. So, I don't have any more of an answer than that, but it is an incredible, incredible failure.
Hey, my second question
go ahead.
is if we're not going to have a 2-state solution, what is it that the Israelis want?
Well, they don't know what they want. They just know they want to feel safe. The current notion being put forward by Ron Dermer, who's sort of Netanyahu's closest aide, and gets some support from Jared Kushner and so on, is as I said earlier, we're going to create a beautiful place in the yellow zone of Gaza. We're going to pour money and reconstruction and jobs and re-education and better. And the Emiratis are going to help us de-radicalize. And from there, we're going to expand outward into Gaza and eventually into the West Bank. There won't be a state. There'll be a kind of emirates, little sort of independent communities that are thriving, where people are living well and their kids have jobs. And that's the future. We do not want a state on our border, because a state will involve a military, and the military will be taken over by the bad guys sooner or later. That's the sort of prevalent view in Israel right now.
All right, thank you. Now, Jeff.
Okay, thank you. All right, Carol.
Uh,
Carol Ewell.
Actually, this is Jaime Milstein. Carol and I are watching this.
Oh, okay. Hi, Jaime.
Yeah, hi. We're watching this very informative talk together, and many of the questions and answers are directed at the lack of communication and different sets of facts that Israelis and Palestinians and people in the rest of the world believe. So my question to you, as a journalist, how much connection or interaction do you have with Al Jazeera, for instance. If the people can't communicate with each other, perhaps the journalists can and arrive on at least a certain number of agreed facts and situations.
So I don't have any contact with Al Jazeera, and I don't. I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think it's a dangerous concept that somehow the storytellers should get together and decide what the story is. That's not my view of my job. My job is to every day come to work and say, I don't have any view of what's good or bad, whether this is a good way forward or a bad way forward. I'm going to explore what the people promoting it say, put it out there for you, tell you why this may or may not be true in these ways, what the other guys say, and you should make your own judgment. I just don't think. I think that would be a dangerous situation for the journalists to sort of come up with a narrative. That's how I feel, Jaime, anyway.
Well, not to really come up with a narrative, but like you pointed out, the majority of Palestinians, the vast majority actually, don't believe that October the 7th happened.
That's because they watch Al Jazeera.
Well,
No, that's actually one of the main reasons. Al Jazeera has never, at least in the Arabic, Al Jazeera, ever gone on about the atrocities of October 7th, ever.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Rabbi Josh.
Thank you both for doing this. This is wonderful. Nice to meet you, Ethan.
Same, Josh.
So you've kind of touched on this a little bit, and taking off from Jaime's question, more pointedly, it seems that given that the information gap is so large, I don't like the word narrative. It's like there's just information gaps. Is there any discussion in Israel about prioritizing just putting information out there so that we can have a common conversation? I feel like this is a problem all over the world, even in this country. So it seems obvious that if you don't educate a generation similarly to you, you're not going to have a common language, and that was evident in Gaza over the last 20 years. So is that a conversation? And then you also sort of touched a little bit on the settlers, and I'm just curious to know what the discourse in Israel is, aside obviously from the right wingers, in the general society about the activities and misadventures of the extremists amongst the settlers. Thanks.
Sure. I'll start with the second. People are upset at settler violence. Those who don't approve, I mean, generally, people think it's a bad thing. Many people think it's exaggerated, the same way that Palestinians think that what was happened on October 7th isn't real. There's a whole organization. They can provide you with documents called Settler Violence is an Invention. Okay, it's all made up by Palestinians. I'm happy to get you the booklets if you'd like, and send you to the organization. So that's again, we have that problem. As I spent my entire life as a journalist, and part of the idea I had, I think, going into it was that, if I can give you the facts, that you'll be able to make an informed choice. And that turned out to be an illusion, Josh. It turns out people are not interested in making informed choices. They're interested in reasserting their own narrative that they have inside them. And and one of the things about the plethora of information is you can do it. There's just so much out there now that, so what was at one time, ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, that's all there was. And it had its own failings, at least, post-war until around 2000. There was we all kind of accepted a certain set of facts. They were problematic facts, but now there's no such thing. And I don't know that Israel is particularly worried about it. I think that they, like the United States, there is a kind of rejection of the idea that there is any one truth. And people want facts to to use to win their battles. And that's what I find more and more, I must say. It's when I was complaining that there is no press spokesperson for the prime minister. I mean, he's hired a young woman from the United States who did local CBS News, and she has no access, but she's sort of does little videos talking about what a hero the prime minister is. And it's just amazing that this is considered a spokesperson.
Okay, thank you. Lee?
Hi. Thanks for doing this. I was just wondering where you turned for your news in Israel and commentary, and if there are any must-reads that we've been missing here. And since you're with Bloomberg, will you touch on the economy a bit, or at least throw out some stock tips?
Yeah. So on the first, I think that Channel 12 and Yediot Aharonot are the best sources of information in Israel, and they are reasonably plugged into the government, so they get information, and they're also they have a fair amount of judgment. So I think they do a very good job. These are not things that are easily accessible when you're abroad. I mean, if you speak Hebrew, they are. I mean, I speak Hebrew, but I get a daily translation of them as well, which you can too for $265 a month from the Israel News Today if you want it. But I mean, it really is very, very useful. Because Haaretz is the newspaper that many read abroad. It's a very left-wing newspaper. It's about 4 to 5% of the Israeli population reads Haaretz and accepts the Haaretz view of the world. I'm not saying it's a bad one. I'm not saying it's not serious, but it is in the context of the current political situation in Israel on one end of it. So that. And then, did you ask me something else? Oh, about Bloomberg. No, about the economy. Well, the economy is quite remarkably in the sense that, despite all of this war stuff, assets in this country have done very well. The shekel is very strong. When I arrived here, it was one of the strongest currencies of the previous 10 years, and the war pushed it down a little bit, but not that much. It's now back up. The stock market is strong. Foreign investment is strong. So, I mean, the guys with the money are not that worried about the things that other people are worried about in terms of what's going on here. I do think that Israel's military successes in Lebanon and Iran gave the money guys a sort of shot in the arm, in the sense that this is a place to invest in, particularly increasingly in defense technology.
Okay, thank you. Shelley?
This touches on something you mentioned about the settlers, but it's a slightly different question, first of all. And thanks, by the way, for giving us a really good feeling for what's on the ground in Israel, because what we read about what's happening in Israel and what may really be happening in Israel is often so different. So this question speaks to that, both in terms of how it's portrayed in American news, which doesn't really speak to you directly, but also often conversations about October 7th sometimes focus on the settler violence as almost the main provocation for October 7th, as if that's the focus of the entire enterprise of Israel somehow, and proves or justifies the fact that Israel should be perceived as a colonial enterprise that's trying to take over West Bank and Gaza. So in your perception, what's the proportion that this settler violence actually dominates, A, the news in Israel, because we read about it a lot here, but B, is an actual large phenomenon as opposed to maybe something that is either minimized or exaggerated for political purposes? And it's a really big question because it comes up a lot in conversations here.
So, Shelley, before I answer, is the question, what role did settler violence play in creating October 7th, or just generally in the whole thing?
That's a perception that is often often spoken about by both American Jews who are left-leaning and also just many Americans who are not Jewish seem to focus on this one particular thing as if that's the dominant phenomenon that has somehow triggered all of October 7th and hatred of Israel. And I'm surprised by that, but maybe I'm missing something. And in American news media, you read it, of course. Sometimes we read about it in some outlets over and over and over, as if this is something happening all the time and more prevalent than I originally thought it was.
It has become more prevalent, but I think you're asking a fair question. And part of the problem is that I don't have an answer, like, in the sense that it's clear that if there were no settler violence, that there wouldn't have been an October 7th and people wouldn't be anti-Israel. That seems very unlikely, right? The core conflict has gone on for 100 years and longer. And if you read, there's a wonderful book called Palestine 1936-39, which, in which everything that was said then is still said now. Nothing has changed in terms of how Arabs here view the idea that there might be any Jewish sovereignty in this land. They consider it absolutely impossible to accept. And so, almost from in its origin story, Israel has created a great deal of anger toward it from the local population. Could it have handled things better? Possibly, of course. Would it have made enough of a difference? October 7th also was such an extraordinary event because of the failure we talked about earlier of the security services, right? If they had been able to stop, if 5 people had been killed or 7 people had been kidnapped, we wouldn't, the whole world would feel different. And so it's not only about what drove the people of Hamas into Israel, but the failure to stop them. So, I don't think there is a simple answer in history about if only there weren't settler violence. I don't think it's a good thing. The settler violence, for one thing, we're talking about illegal and increasingly the army used to be the stronghold more of the sort of kibbutz movement of left-wing Zionism, labor Zionism. Today, the lochamim, the people who are really the combatants in the army, tend to come from the right, from the settler community. And so the army and the settlers kind of work together, often in ways that are very distressing if you think this shouldn't be happening. So it is a problem. Is it all you need to know about why the world hates Israel? I don't think so. No, I think we're talking about a lot of other problems. I think that the role of Jews in Christian and Muslim self-stories is very complicated and can't be discounted as an important factor. I mean, in theory, both religions believe that there should not be any Jews left because they both graduated from it. Why are they still here? And there are a lot of deep issues that cause people to oppose Israel, to dislike Jews, and to feel that the success of Jews is due to their having cheated. And there are all sorts of things going on at once. I mean, you look at this region and you have country after country after country which has failed. Lebanon, Syria, Egypt, terrible, terrible countries. People want to blame Israel right next to it. They feel the need to blame Israel. But it's kind of a crazy thought, isn't it? And so how is it possible that Israel is successful and these other countries are such failures? Something untoward must be going on.
Okay, thank you, Phil. And then also, I think Jeff Gornbein had a question.
So Linda and I had the privilege of going to opening night of the San Francisco Jewish Film Festival. The opening night movie was Coexistence My Ass. And it was done by a lady, a comedian. You probably know her. Ethan.
I don't know her, but I do know of her, yes.
So she was raised and born and raised in Nevi Shalom, the Oasis of Peace. And she's a very funny, and she tries to bring some humor to the situation. But the end of the movie was really disturbing for me. It was the first time I ever heard the word genocide as a term used to what Jews might be doing in Gaza. And it just so disturbed me. And then I'm hearing it over and over again. And it seems it's so, and it's even in certain polls, American Jews apparently believe that and I can't quote you the exact percentages, but this term genocide, how do you react to it? And how do we differentiate what's happening, what's happening in Gaza from that whole word? Because it's such a loaded term.
Yes, it's a very loaded term. I don't tend to use it. I don't really want to be forced to decide what it is and whether it's going on or has gone on in Gaza. It's too loaded. So I don't have an answer to you about whether it's an appropriate term. You know, there are a lot of dead people in Gaza, 70,000 for sure. I mean, 69,000 for sure, and more almost certainly. The place is utterly destroyed. Now, you know, when you say that to a conservative Israeli, he say, well, shouldn't have come and slaughtered us, right? Right? That would have been help. That would have been a good thing not to do. Okay, I'm sorry, a lot of dead people. Don't do it again. So that's one attitude, right? And it's a very difficult question. What is it? What was the appropriate response by Israel to what happened on that day? What is the meaning of the Iranian Axis, Hezbollah, the Houthis? How do you measure all this and think about what's an appropriate amount of dead people to get your message to the other side that you're not about to fold your tent and go back to Poland and Yemen? Okay, I don't have an answer for you. Thank God it's not my job to get an answer for you. I, like you, will write that some people call it genocide. And of course, genocide has this long history, very specific Jewish history, which makes it so disturbing. So that's what I can say. I mean, the woman in that movie is, you know, she's, I think she's married to a Palestinian. I mean, she's a, you know, she's a.
She's married to an Israeli. It's his name is Amit, I think.
Oh, really? Okay. So,
Yeah.
but she's
Yeah.
not. She's not totally Jewish. I think she's.
No, she
partly,
is. Both. No. Both her
okay.
parents are Jewish.
One's
I
from
just saw
Iran
the
and one's
film.
from somewhere. Okay, fine.
Yeah.
All right. Anyway, but she's a left
Yeah.
winger and she's very angry
Mhm.
about what's going on. That's what I understand. God bless her. Yeah.
All right. So it's past the time we were supposed to finish. Jeff and Carol, did you want to ask a really quick question, and then we're gonna have to wrap? Jeff Gornbein, did you have a question?
I'm good. You covered it.
Okay. All right. Thanks. And Carol?
Yes, Bernardo wanted to ask a question.
Oh, great.
Yeah, first I'll ask you, or I'll describe a hypothetical situation, and then I ask you a question. This is the hypothetical situation. Suppose you were to take off your reporting journalist hat and leave your thinking person hat on, and maybe put the hat of the opinion columnist, maybe. So that's the hypothesis. This is the question. Within the realm of the possible, there are all sorts of possible outcomes of this situation. Within the realm of the possible, what you see as the most optimistic outcome, or I don't know how to exactly say what I mean, but the least bad outcome within the realm of the possible.
So I'm not going to do that because I mean, I feel like I've taken a vow like of a priest. I'm really not seeking to express opinions about it. But I mean, I think part of the difficulty in answering your question is what is the least bad? What is it that you aim for? What do you want? Do you want to see willy-nilly the survival of the Jewish state? Do you want to see equality among the people who live there? Do you want to see the world not hating it? These are very difficult questions to know whether, because you also have a long arc involved. I mean, if Israel decides to just be a kind of iron wall for the next 20 years, and then in 100 years when we're all dead, it's thriving, but a lot of people died on the way. Is that okay? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. And I thank God that it's not my job to know.
All right. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for participating and for everyone's questions.
Thanks for your great
I-
questions, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Okay.
Ethan. This was so
Okay.
great.
Yeah.
It was so great.
Thank
And
you
don't-
so
There,
much.
guys.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night.
Wonderful,
Thanks,
wonderful.
Josh. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, I am the host, and I will be ending the video now with Deborah's permission. Is that
Yes, of course.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you all
Bye.
so much.
Yeah,
Have a
bye-bye.
beautiful day. Shavua Tov.
Shavua tov.